Morning, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you live here in the Faculty Library of Arts and Philosophy, but also those joining us online. Hi, we've invited Srishti Sharma today for the final Digital Humanities talk of this academic year. Before Srishti starts her presentation, some small practical things. As you've heard, this session will be recorded, but if you do feel uncomfortable with this, just turn off your video. And at the end of this presentation, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat, which Tess will monitor, or just ask them directly via video after the presentation. I will make sure to send all the participants both the slides as well as the recording. Now let me start by introducing Srishti. Srishti Sharma is a Transnational Access Research Fellow on the H2020 Computational Literary Studies project at Ghent Center for Digital Humanities. She graduated from the Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and studied cultural analytics as a visiting researcher at the University of Milan, Bicocca, under the guidance of Dr. Federico Pianzola. Today, she will present the results of her research project, Can a Book Make You Happy?, which explores the emotional impact of fictional novels on their readers through online reviews. The corpus includes nearly 450 English books from 9 different genres and more than 800,000 reviews from the Goodreads platform. Using sentiment analysis and emotion recognition, she seeks to investigate emotional links between genre, plot, and reader response. Now, Srishti, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. The title of this research is Can a Book Make You Happy? I'm doing this in collaboration with Dr. Federico Pianzola, who is currently working as an assistant professor at the University of Birmingham. And this project is also under the guidance of GhentCDH. Many of you are here. Thank you for showing interest. So I'll begin by introducing the idea of this research. Can a book make you happy? I know if asked individually, almost everyone will give me an overwhelming yes, but I think it's difficult to statistically prove and come up with correlations that will explain the relationship between a reader and a book. If you all have been reading, or even as a child, novels, nonfiction, any sort of books, you will have noticed that when a reader reads something, it develops kind of a link to the book. It could be through the characters, through the plot, through the setting. Even if it's set in your hometown, you have that sort of link. So we intend to investigate all of these emotional links that build this reader and book relationship through the lens of online reviews. I would also like to just give you an idea of how we intend to do that. Initially, if we were to just use sentiment analysis to measure how a book and a reader correlate, it would just be an oversimplified version of it. Let's take the first example, which is just Dumbledore loves karaoke, which could be marked as positive. And simply, if we just average out all the sentences in a book, we will have like one value called positive. So we could just simplify a book and say that, okay, this book is positive, this book is neutral, this book is positive, which is an oversimplification of sorts. But when we dig one step deeper, which is emotion detection, we can actually figure out, if we say something like Draco sneered at Potter, it's not just negative, it's anger. It's more than just a simplified version of a negative emotion. So using these two techniques, I intend to figure out how we can uncover some emotional links between a book and the reader. Coming to the hypothesis, the first hypothesis is that the sentiment of a book has a positive linear relationship with the sentiment of its reviews. It's like the most simplest explanation that we can have, but also complicated to prove because it's it's difficult to quantify a book and just come up with one number, again, one value that can sum up the entire book into one single value. So as we discussed, there are multiple facets to this relationship, and this hypothesis, while being the core of the research, is also something that is very closely related to the actual research question. The second one is something that we noticed as readers, which is if there is a variation in the ending of the story, it has a higher impact on readers, hence a more positive relation with the sentiment of the reviews. It just means that if the ending is unexpected, a surprise, or has a very different sort of ending than anticipated, it can also have a higher impact on the reviews, on the readers, and hence the reviews. So this is, I would say, a simpler hypothesis than the first one, but also it would be interesting to see if the ending is something that people remember more than the entire book. The third one is something that we came up with towards the end of this research project, actually, which is the total amplitude difference between the emotion arc. So we are also looking at the emotion arc of books, which is just like a map of all the emotions in the book. It goes negative in the beginning, positive towards the end. How does the emotion flow throughout the book? And the more peaks and highs and lows there are, the more impactful the book is on the reader. And this is something that we will calculate by using the amplitude difference in the peaks. And the last one is based on a previous research done by Jockers. So he actually figured out all the emotion arcs for best-selling books. And he noticed that most best-selling books have a rhythmic beat sentiment. It means that when you read a bestseller, it is usually, you can notice that there are peaks like highs and lows and highs and lows in a very rhythmic sort of motion. So this particular hypothesis is based on the fact that if a book has a rhythmic beat sentiment, it is more impactful and it has a higher, it has a more positive response in the reviews. Coming down to the methodology. So the data collection was a really, really long process, but I think it's very important to stress on the fact that the more data you have, the better data you have, the better sort of analysis you can come up with. For this research, we have about 450 books spanned across 9 genres. So that's almost 50 books for each genre and more than 800,000 reviews, a minimum of 300 reviews for each book. So we decided to populate it as maximum as possible to get more data and to be able to analyze it more deeply. The analysis itself is based on 5 features. The first 2 are just the simple values that I was talking about. The sentiment, the average sentiment value of a book and the average sentiment value of the corresponding reviews. But one step deeper, we also want to see all the emotions exhibited in the book and the corresponding emotions exhibited in the reviews. So for thriller, it could be like horror, fear, anger in the book, but in the reviews, it could be surprise, anticipation, joy, which sound very different, but it can be expected that a thriller, the scarier it is, the more horror aspect there is, the more surprise there is, the more positive the correlation. Which can be ignored if you only look at the sentiment, because the sentiment in case of thrillers would definitely be negative. The more anger, the more fear, the more sort of negative emotions it displays, the better, the more interesting it gets for the reader. So if we only look at the sentiment, it would be very difficult to come up with a correlation that would explain the relationship. But if we look one step closer and look at the emotions in the book, they could better explain what is the sort of relationship between the emotions in thrillers as a genre and the emotions of the corresponding reviews. And last but not the least, we have the story arc, which is again based on the idea by Jockers that you can map the sentiment of each sentence throughout the book and create some sort of a flow chart that would explain what are the sentiments throughout the book. So it could just be very positive in the beginning, negative in the middle, positive towards the end. And he also came up with 6 graphs and 6 variations, which are mostly seen in books. So we will also try to cluster all the books and their story arcs and try to fit them, match them with which of the 6 graphs do they fit in. Just an example, one graph is like rags to riches. So someone who started off as a poor man, worked hard, faced more calamities, and then towards the end, he conquered everything. There's an arc called the chosen one, like Harry Potter, that starts off as a person being super normal, but then figuring out his powers, fighting a demon of sorts, and then winning towards the end. So there are more graphs like these, 6 in total, and we'll try to map the books and a genre per se to each of the graphs and see which genre exhibits which kind of story arc. Okay. So the dataset curation, this was particularly difficult. Actually, it sounds very simple to just have a data of books and reviews, but to be able to make the data as gender neutral, as have less bias in all facets, it took us a long time to come up with a list of books that we can use for this particular study. For the data set, we have 9 genres, as I mentioned. 6 of them are just like your everyday genre, romance, children, young adult, thrillers, and so on. But when we were looking at the reviews, we realized that a lot of readers actually tag the books as classic or classic literature. For Dune or Martian, it would be sci-fi or science or time travel. And it would have been very ignorant of us to sort of ignore that entire relationship, because that also gives an insight into the motivation of the reader as to why he is reading that particular book. It could be that it's for a class in terms of classics, or it's that entire community and he wants to be more sort of learned or join the classic literature community. So we decided not to ignore that relationship and come up with 2 new data sets called classics and sci-fi. And we picked the top 50 most reviewed books on Goodreads so that we will have more data for the research. Simple as that. Another interesting thing is that we also picked at least 40% books by female authors, which was quite a task. We wanted our data to be gender neutral, so not to have any bias related to gender, maybe because of the time period or the time era that the book was written in. So we tried to make it as gender neutral as possible. So at least half of the data set is written by female authors and the rest is written by male. So this was particularly difficult in terms of classics, where we just had like a handful of, I would say, 5 to 10 female authors in the list. And we had to like look up for more obscure titles and come up with books that were written by female authors in order to balance the data set. Consecutively, it was also difficult in romance to find male authors. So I had to look up, I think, almost 1,000 books to find 20 male authors in the romance genre. Just saying. So the rest of the data sets were actually quite balanced, which was a good surprise. But yes, we decided to keep it gender neutral so that it does not affect the nature of the study. Another interesting thing is all of the titles are by unique authors in each genre, because otherwise one particular series like Game of Thrones or Harry Potter would then sort of take over and bias the entire data set, because that would be that would have values, and if we look at the model, it would start learning from those books and it would affect the study. So we decided to keep it all down to unique authors, unique titles, no book series repetition. However, 2 authors can be mentioned in 2 different genres. So for example, J.K. Rowling, she could be mentioned as Harry Potter in children's, but she could also be in our, I think, romance or thriller data set under casual vacancy. So that would again differentiate between the type of literature that she has written, and I don't think it would affect the style. So that is allowed. Another data set that we are also including is the bestseller data set, our jobbers, because we wanted to include that and see what the relationship of bestsellers is with the corresponding reviews. Since we already know the story arcs and we have the data for it, we wanted to also include those sort of books and see how genre-wise distribution occurs, and also the distribution of best-selling books. How does that differ from each genre? So the extra metadata, of course, you have the text and the date of publication, the reviews, but the two extra things that we're adding in the metadata is the gender of the author, which was manually obtained, and the list of tags, which is popular shelves on Goodreads, because of which we created the two different genres. So you can actually cross-check and see if a book is mentioned, let's say like Dune, if a book is mentioned in sci-fi, not in fantasy, why that is. So you can just look at the popular tags and see that most people would tag that book as science or science fiction or steampunk rather than fantasy or paranormal. The other half of the data set is the reviews. The reviews data set was the UCSD data set called book graphs. Thankfully, we did not have to scrape all of it. And we have a very rich data set. It's public, it's open, it's accessible by all. It's called the UCSD book graph data set. What they did was they scraped reviews for the top most reviewed books on Goodreads up until 2017. So this is why we have such a good number of reviews. However, for the two data sets that we tried to include, the two genres, classics and bestsellers, we did not have the reviews for that in the data set. So we had to manually scrape the data. Because of this, the reviews of classics and bestsellers are far more recent as compared to the other genres. However, we allowed that difference because the nature of Goodreads is it would just give you random reviews. So you cannot pick and choose which time frame you want the reviews from. It will always give you random default reviews. So that again corresponds to the other reviews in the data set. So we decided to keep them as again, the reviews are only in English language. Somehow the scrape reviews had some Persian in them, but we manually cleaned them all so that it's only in English. Again, the books are also just the top most reviewed English novels, fiction novels, because non-fiction and poems could have a very different relationship with the readers. So we decided to keep our scope only till fiction English novels. Okay. Coming to the data processing part, this was also interesting. I mean, it would look simple that the text could easily just be cleaned and processed into sentences, and then just we can move on to the analysis. But we found a very interesting thing when we were trying to do tests on sentiment and emotion detection. So for the books, we just removed the acknowledgements, the introductions, all the extra parts so that they wouldn't affect the sentiment. And same for the reviews, we tried to collate all the reviews into one text file, because some of the reviews are just like one-liners, like, wow, this book was amazing. And then for classics, you have reviews like, oh, the prose was lucid and I was lost, I was transported into a different time, and you can see influences from Shakespeare and Jane Austen and so on. So in order to normalize the reviews, we decided to collate all the reviews into one text per book. So you would have the text for the book, and you would also have the text for the corresponding reviews, and then tokenize them into sentences. Because you can see a very clear difference in genres, because for children's genre, you can see the reviews will be very, very short and very concise, like, my son loved this book, or in my son's words, this book rocks. But then obviously for fantasy or romance, you can see people mentioning characters, like even for Game of Thrones, like, oh, that character was the worst, or oh my God, I love Dumbledore, you know, Voldemort gives me the creeps, something like that. So it's going to be very different. So we decided to collate them all together per genre so that we don't have to then take care of the length and the nature of the reviews themselves. Another interesting thing was when we decided to do sentiment analysis, we noticed that the top most negative or the most positive words included character names. So the model would just automatically learn that a character is a villain or a hero. In case of Harry Potter, the model would just generally learn that Voldemort is negative. So if I give a sentence like Voldemort loves karaoke, it would automatically have a more negative result. I have this very interesting result, which I actually found out just yesterday because I was trying a few sentences to put in the slides. And I noticed this clear difference in a regular model. Like this is not even fine-tuned. This is not even being used for the study, but it's just a model that people generally use every day. And it's trained on Twitter data. And somehow Twitter data has Harry Potter references. So the model has just automatically learned that Voldemort is present in more negative context and Dumbledore is present in more positive context. So when I say Dumbledore loves karaoke, the result is positive. If I were to tag this sentence, it would come out as positive, which it should be. But when I say Voldemort loves karaoke, it should not make a difference because the sentence is still positive, but you can automatically see the difference in the values. And this would turn out as neutral because it has a higher negative value. So character names turned out to be a very interesting feature in the models. And we wanted to keep it objective so that each sentence can be used as it is, as its own token and not be affected by characters or just plots that were mentioned in the book, because then that would affect the relationship with the reader. So then that's why we decided to mask all character names in the books. And we did that by using the named entity recognition, which recognizes person names or personal pronouns and nouns, and it just masks all of those values. For reviews, we noticed that a lot of reviews actually do not contain character names, they contain author names because they're trying to talk about the writing style of the author, or they're comparing it with some other author that they read and they would like, this book was so not expected. I read so-and-so author and I realized that maybe this was very similar, but it wasn't. So we decided to also not include author names because then that would also affect the relationship of the reviews with books. Coming to the analysis, I have a very small picture of the emotions here. It's called the Prachak Wheel of Emotions, which has, as you can see, many different circles. And the deeper you go, the more the emotions become varied and specific. So we decided to keep it to the second layer. Most of the emotion detection model use this as the basis of their emotion range. So we will have about 9 emotions from joy, anger, surprise, anticipation, disgust, and so on. However, it's the nature of surprise and anticipation is still ambiguous. You can never say that, okay, if a person is surprised, is it positive or is it negative? Or if the person is anticipating something, would that be positive or negative? So because of that ambiguity, we decided to exclude surprise and anticipation from our data set. The models that we will be using for sentiment analysis and emotion detection will be 2 varied ones. One will be a transformer-based model and the other would be a dictionaries-based model, because we want to compare the performance of these 2 models with our data set, because it has books and reviews are like super modern text, right? They would have OMG, LOL, and emojis even in the text. But books, I even have Romeo and Juliet in the data set. So you can imagine just the style difference between the 2 data sets and how one model can fit both. So we are actually expecting dictionaries-based method to perform well on the books, and transformer-based model perform better on the reviews. So we will be comparing the results from both and seeing which model performs best. For the story arcs, as I mentioned, we will be using the moving window score calculation, which is we'll be using a chunk of a moving window, let's say 50 sentences, and the average of all the 50 sentences will be the first value, and then the next 50 sentences will be the second value. So that's how we will span our entire book in the terms of sentence tokens, and not just maybe page-wise. There are other methods to do it, like page-wise or paragraph-wise, but we will be deciding, we'll be going forward with sentences. This is also to give context to the model, because if you only pick one sentence, that will have a different context when compared to the entire book. So we decided to keep it a vast moving window so that it has context, but it's also not too much and too oversimplified. Okay. For the purpose of today's presentation, we will stick to transformer-based sentiment analysis. This is also something that we focused on as part of my time here with GhentCDH. So I will just be also quickly giving an overview of what we found out. This process is still undergoing, so I don't have the final results yet, but I would still like to share what we've done and hear your thoughts on the methodology and the future prospects of this research. So the transformer-based sentiment analysis model, we decided at first to use the Distelbert pre-trained model because it was trained on book reviews. So we thought it would naturally just do better. But when compared to the Excel and Roberta model, fine-tuned over book, annotated book data set, we saw that that had the best F1 score, which is the best performing model, and we decided to go ahead with it. The next, for both the books and the reviews data set, we will be using two different models, but the same base model. So we will be using Excel and Roberta for both, but we will fine tune them on books and on reviews separately, because we realize it's impossible for a data set a model to be trained for both styles of text. So we decided to keep them separate and fine tune them specifically for books and specifically for reviews. For the books, we are using the dense data set. This is also publicly available, but you will have to send a request to the authors. But they're super nice. They will definitely just share it with you. It contains about 10,000 sentences, paragraphs annotated in terms of emotions. But you can also just correlate each emotion and come up with the sentiment value yourself. So that's how we are using this for both sentiment analysis and emotion detection in books. For the reviews, unfortunately, apparently there is no annotated data set that we found for reviews, book reviews specifically. We have them for movie reviews, we have them for Twitter, Reddit comments, but we do not have anything for book reviews specifically. So there is another person called Alessandro Fossati, and he was recently working on this model. So he used 3 data sets, Reddit comments, tweets, and also movie reviews to train the Excel and Roberta model. And we'll be using the same model for our research so that we don't have to repeat the same process. And I have to say the results are promising after training with 3 data sets. So we're looking forward to it. That's about it for the transformer-based sentiment analysis right now. We are still working on it and we're still coming up with these results. Once we do have the results for both books and emotions for the reviews, we will then come up with a correlation and see which genre has a better correlation in terms of sentiment and also in terms of emotions. So we are trying to figure out what are the emotions in each genre that correlate with the reviews. Like I mentioned before, for thrillers, it could be that fear has the highest correlation with its reviews. Or for romance, it could be joy. For children's, it could be surprise, or something else maybe. So we're trying to go one step deeper and see which particular emotion is highly correlated with the reviews for each genre. And here is the next steps for the project, which is the sentiment story arc. This is actually done using the dictionary-based method, which was done by Federico Pianzola. So we have the values for sentiment analysis of the books and the reviews. And this is how a sentiment story arc looks like when you only use a moving window of about 50 sentences. As you can see, the gray one, that's the original arc, which is very, very noisy. So we need to smooth this, and the more you smoothen it, the more widespread or the more obvious the plot gets. The one in the red is like closest to the actual plot, but if we smoothen it further, you can see that this is like the simplified macro shape of the book. So we're also currently trying to work with parameters and see how much to simplify the plot so that it does represent the book, but at the same time, you can also sort of cluster it with other stories, story arcs in the particular genre. So we're playing with parameters and seeing how much simplification should we do with each book and with each of the shapes for the books. The problem with this is that any text that you give can be simplified into an arc. So you need to be sure that the arc that you have actually represents the text and it's not just an oversimplification of the text. If you give me like a paragraph or one page of just random text, I could still plot the sentiment for it all, but does it actually represent what the text is trying to say? That's the question here. So that's the question that we're trying to solve currently, and this is still like an undergoing process. That's about it in terms of the analysis and the project right now. We're still working on it. I'd love to hear your reviews on the methodology and just the research in general. In conclusion, I just want to share a few thoughts on the kind of research that I've done here and the scope of it. Firstly, I think working with literary text is very, very complex. I think text data in general is easy to process, easy to work with, but literary texts have so many layers to it, just in terms of style, in terms of time period difference, and mostly with languages. I mean, most of you here work with multilingual models, multilingual data set. So I think we need better framework to encompass almost all the facets of literary text. It's more than just text. There are many layers to it, and the better pre-processing that we do on that text affects how well can we actually work or analyze that particular data set. Okay, the second one is online reviews. So online reviews weren't our first thought when we decided to work with this research. The best way to actually find what the reader thinks is to either ask the readers or come up with fMRI scans of the reader when he's reading the text. But obviously that's not possible or that's not feasible. So we went with online reviews. While online reviews are a humongous data set, and it's very easy to work with as well. But we also must just keep in mind the limitation that they offer, because it would also differ with the platform that you choose. We chose Goodreads, which is only used for reviews or just sharing text about books. So it was very specific to books. But if you choose something like Amazon, then you will have commercial motivation. You will have the motivation of the reviewer to be visible or to be seen. And Amazon would just automatically also highlight those reviews which would praise the book and also praise the quality of Amazon as a provider. So you will always have to be careful and take that into account when you are working with it, just as an insight into the motivation of the reviewer. And lastly, emotion detection as a technique. While it sounds fascinating and we would love to come up with the best way to represent a book in terms of emotions, it's also not very well developed. Just as you saw, we do not have an annotated data set for book reviews, which is very surprising because we have so many for movie reviews. And we all use reviews. We've at least heard of people using reviews in general. So it was quite surprising that there aren't enough emotion annotated models for book reviews. So as always, I would say that more data will be helpful to further the research, but emotion detection as a technique, I feel, is also still building and needs more refinement in general. That's about it. I hope, I just want to acknowledge a few people here and thank the CLS INFRA project for giving me the opportunity to be here. My collaborator, Dr. Federico Pianzuna, he was also the one who encouraged me to apply for this commission. Julie, Tess, Lisa, Christoph, everyone who's here from the GhentCDH team, thank you so much for the incredible support that also I did not expect, but I was super happy to be here, and it's been a wonderful experience with the GhentCDH team. Also Els and Pranay from the LD3 group, they have been super helpful with the technical aspect of this project, because I was not an expert when I started this, but it's nice to get going, get talking, and then figure out the tiny details. So I would also like to thank them for just the patience and also the support that they provide. That's all. Thank you so much for being here.